She was found dying on the side of an Oklahoma highway. Her name was fake, her past erased, her son vanished, and the man she called her father had watched her every move for years with cold, possessive eyes. This is the true story of a stolen life unraveling in silence. This case is about a young woman whose life was nothing like it seemed. It begins in Oklahoma City in 1990. A quiet stretch of road, early morning haze settling over the pavement. A woman is found lying beside the shoulder, barely breathing. Her name is listed as Tanya Hughes. She is rushed to the hospital, but dies the next day. The man who claims to be her husband is decades older. His name is Clarence Hughes. But none of it is real. Not her name, not his, not the story they told the world. She had a son, a toddler named Michael. Big eyes, bright smile. But just weeks after Tanya's death, Michael vanishes without a trace, and Clarence becomes a ghost. The case draws in federal investigators, journalists, strangers with questions. What they find is not just one crime. It is a lifetime of deception that spans states and aliases. The woman in the hospital bed was not Tanya. Years earlier, she was Sharon Marshall. Before that, she was someone else entirely. Her real name was Suzanne Sevakis, and she had been taken from her real family when she was only a child. The man calling himself her husband had once posed as her father, Franklin Delano Floyd, a convicted offender, a man with a past soaked in violence. He kept her close, watched her constantly, moved her from place to place. Behind closed doors, the control he held over her life turned into something far more disturbing. She was denied the chance to become who she really was. Even her identity had been stolen. Friends remembered a brilliant girl, top of her class, full scholarship to Georgia Tech, but behind her eyes was something hidden, something frightened. This is not just a story of a crime. It is the story of a life taken in pieces, a girl turned into a stranger, a mother whose child disappeared into silence, and a man who shaped her fate in the darkest ways imaginable. This is the true story of Suzanne Sevakis, the girl in the picture. The story begins to darken long before Suzanne Sevakis is ever found on that Oklahoma road. Back in the late 1970s, her mother, Sandy Brandenburg, was struggling. She had 4 children and a chaotic home life in Georgia. When she briefly went to jail on a minor charge, she left her kids in the care of a man she thought she could trust. His name was Brandon Williams, but that name was a lie. His real name was Franklin Delano Floyd. And by the time Sandy was released, her children were gone. She never saw Suzanne again. Floyd took Suzanne and disappeared. He abandoned the other children in a group home. What followed was a life on the run, a life lived under aliases and forged documents. Floyd would resurface in different states under different names, but Suzanne was always with him. She was 5 years old when he took her. By the time she turned 10, she was calling him her father. Neighbors believed the story. No one asked questions. He controlled every part of her life, where she lived, what she wore, who she talked to, and what she was allowed to remember. They moved often. Mississippi, Georgia, Florida, always in the shadows, always under new names. Suzanne enrolled in school again and again, each time as someone else, each time with Floyd posing as her father. At home, he became more possessive, more unpredictable. Behind closed doors, there were moments no one saw, acts of control, punishments that went beyond discipline, a steady erosion of her autonomy. Years passed in silence. By the time Suzanne was a teenager, she had become Sharon Marshall. That name was the one most people would remember. In high school, she was radiant. Long blonde hair, sharp mind, bright smile. Teachers described her as gifted. She won science fairs, made honor roll, dreamed of becoming an aerospace engineer. Her acceptance letter to Georgia Tech came with a full scholarship. It was a future she had fought for, but Floyd would not let her go. She became pregnant at 17. The details surrounding the pregnancy were unclear, disturbing even then. But she gave birth to a son, a boy named Michael. Floyd forced her to put him up for adoption. He then moved them across the country again. Georgia was gone. Her friends never saw her again. Her name changed once more. Her dreams evaporated. In Arizona, she became Tanya, a young mother now living in a cramped apartment with Floyd. He began introducing her as his wife. The lies deepened. The boundaries blurred. She got a job at a strip club to support them. At first, she was quiet, covered herself, avoided the stage, but the money kept them afloat. Or rather, it kept Floyd in control. He took her earnings, watched her while she worked, told people what she could and could not say. At the club, his presence made others uncomfortable. He told customers she was his daughter, then told others she was his wife. There was no consistency, only control. Other dancers recalled how Tanya seemed nervous, quiet. She kept to herself, but was polite, often tired, always looking over her shoulder. The kind of woman who had learned how to survive in silence. Meanwhile, Floyd became more erratic. He made disturbing comments to patrons, criticized Tanya's body, suggested surgeries, pressured her to perform more. The tension around him grew heavy. Other employees tried to keep their distance. At some point, Suzanne tried to escape. She confided in a coworker. She talked about taking her son and leaving, but Floyd always seemed to know what she was planning. He controlled their documents, their housing, their car. Every exit was already blocked. Later in Florida, they met a young woman named Cheryl. She was 19, a runaway with big dreams. Floyd invited her to his house, said she could stay for a while, but something went terribly wrong. Cheryl would later be found dead along a highway. The cause was violent. Floyd was charged with her murder. Witnesses said she had been trying to get away from him. It was another thread unraveling in a long pattern of coercion. Back in Oklahoma, Suzanne now lived under the name Tanya Hughes. She had a job, a son, and a fake husband. But something inside her had changed. She was planning her final exit. She reached out to friends again, talked about escape, told people she would take Michael and leave soon. But before she could vanish, tragedy hit. She was found alone on the side of the road. Critical condition, massive head trauma, died the next morning. The story Floyd gave police did not make sense. She had stormed out after an argument. He found her hit by a car. He could not explain her injuries. No witnesses. No damage to nearby vehicles. Just silence. And then Michael was gone. Floyd said he gave the boy to state services, but no records existed. No paperwork. No confirmation. The last trace of Suzanne's child vanished like dust in the wind. Investigators began to suspect something far worse. Years passed, but the lies only got deeper. Her name was not Tanya, not Sharon, and no one could figure out who she really was. Her school records were inconsistent. Her birth certificate was fake. Her social security number led nowhere. The only clue left behind was a photograph, a girl in a high school yearbook, a smile frozen in time. It was the only truth left in a life built on falsehoods. This was not just a missing persons case, not just a murder. It was a dismantling of identity, a life held hostage, a future rewritten by the hands of a man who refused to let her go. Every movement, every word, every choice shaped by his shadow, and still no one knew her name, not yet. It was the morning of April 1990 when the silence broke. In a residential stretch of Oklahoma City, a call came in to emergency responders. A woman had been found barely breathing, crumpled along the roadside, her skull fractured, her body bruised, her breathing faint and irregular. The woman was young, blonde, dressed in casual clothes. She had no identification on her. A motorist had seen her lying near a ditch and stopped in confusion. There were no skid marks, no sign of a crash, no broken glass, no witnesses to any impact. Just her body and the thick stillness of early morning air. By the time she was brought to the hospital, she was already slipping away. Her injuries were severe, head trauma, internal bleeding. Her body began shutting down. Nurses tried to stabilize her, but she never regained consciousness. They searched for someone to contact. That was when the man arrived. He called himself Clarence Marcus Hughes. He said the woman was his wife. He said her name was Tanya. The medical staff noticed something. He was far older than the victim, at least 30 years her senior. He showed little emotion, no panic, no questions. He avoided eye contact. He answered vaguely. When asked what had happened, his response was strange. He claimed they had argued, said she walked out alone. He followed, claimed to find her already struck by a car, but nothing about the story matched the scene. There was no vehicle damage, no reports of a collision, no tire tracks or debris. It felt staged, unnatural, like something had already been erased. Tanya died later that day, 20 years old. Cause of death, blunt force trauma. manner of death, suspicious. Her funeral was small, held under her fake name. People from the strip club came, a few friends. They remembered her kindness, her soft voice, her tired eyes. But no one knew who she really was, not even those closest to her. There were no baby pictures, no childhood stories, no school records that matched. She had always kept her past vague, always changed the subject. After her death, custody of her young son Michael fell to Clarence. But weeks later, the child disappeared. Clarence told police he handed Michael over to social services, but there were no records, no transfer, no paperwork. Investigators grew suspicious. They contacted the Department of Human Services. Nothing. No Michael Hughes. No record of any child being surrendered. Clarence offered no answers. He became agitated, erratic. Then he vanished. The FBI began to dig. They pulled his fingerprints, ran them through federal databases. What they found sent shockwaves through the case. Clarence Marcus Hughes did not exist. The man who had claimed Tanya as his wife was really Franklin Delano Floyd, a fugitive, a convicted offender, a man who had escaped justice years earlier and built a new identity through lies and forged documents. His record dated back decades: assault, kidnapping, armed robbery, violent control, a pattern of coercion and disappearance. Suddenly, everything made sense. The forged papers, the strange behavior, the obsessive control over Tanya's life. But the deeper investigators looked, the more terrifying the story became. The woman they buried as Tanya Hughes had never legally existed either. Her name was fake, her identity fabricated, her background a ghost trail. They reopened her file, searched through yearbooks, school districts, medical records. Piece by piece, they traced her back through aliases: Sharon Marshall, Sharon Hughes, Monica, Tanya. Finally, they found a photograph, a senior portrait from a Georgia high school. Blonde hair, blue eyes, top of her class. Her name listed as Sharon. The face was unmistakable. It was her, but still not her real name. Years passed, and then came a break. A journalist named Matt Birkbeck began investigating the case. He followed leads, talked to former classmates, tracked court documents. Eventually, the FBI took over the forensic trail. They pulled DNA from Tanya's remains, matched it to archived military paternity records. That is when the truth finally surfaced. Her real name was Suzanne Marie Sevakis. She had been born in North Carolina. She had siblings, a biological father, a life before the lies. She had been kidnapped at 5 years old by Franklin Floyd, while her mother served a short sentence. The rest of her childhood had been spent under false names and false fathers. Her entire identity erased by the man who would one day force her to pose as his wife. It was not just a story of murder. It was a lifetime of psychological captivity, a forced transformation from daughter to dependent, from dependent to object, from object to victim. Suzanne never got the chance to grow up with her own name, her own history, her own choices. Her entire existence had been rewritten by the man who took her. In one final act of control, Floyd buried the truth with her. He never confessed, never explained what happened to Michael, never spoke Suzanne's name again. The climax of this story is not one moment, but the totality of what was taken: her name, her freedom, her voice, all of it gone until strangers pulled her life from the shadows and gave it back to history. It was not justice, but it was finally the truth. And it revealed the depths of one of the most disturbing and haunting cases in modern American true crime. A young woman controlled from childhood to death, a child stolen without a sound, and a man who manipulated every record to make sure no one ever found out, until they did. Suzanne was buried under a name that was never hers. The grave marker read Tanya Hughes, a borrowed identity etched in stone. It took years for the truth to surface. And even then, the world only learned who she was after she was already gone. Her real name came back like a whisper: Suzanne Marie Sevakis, a name lost in transit, a name silenced in hotel rooms and fake schools and low-lit clubs where no one asked too many questions. The apartment she once lived in sat empty for months. Inside were only shadows, a child's toy, a worn couch, a folded letter never sent. Neighbors remembered her as polite, quiet, a little distant. They did not know what was unfolding behind the walls. Some said she smiled too easily. Others said she rarely spoke above a whisper. No one could explain the weight in her eyes. Michael was never found. His face remains frozen in age-progressed photos. No one knows where Floyd took him or how long the child survived. The man who knew everything died without ever telling the truth. His last days were spent in a cell. No letters, no apologies, only silence. The strip club where Suzanne worked eventually closed. The building still stands. Peeling paint, broken lights, a locked door no one opens anymore. At night, the street outside is quiet. Just the hum of power lines and the occasional wind brushing against metal. What remains is a story that ends in fragments. A girl erased, a boy vanished, a life broken into names that were never hers. The world moved on, but some places never did. And in those spaces, there is still the echo of someone trying to be seen. Michael's birth certificate was never found. No hospital ever confirmed his delivery. The foster system held no trace of his name. Franklin Floyd claimed he gave the boy away, but left no document behind. Years later, a photo surfaced of a child locked inside a motel bathroom. His eyes matched Suzanne's. The date was never confirmed. The door was sealed from the outside.